Are you an animal or a person?
I'm animal gorilla.
Now I can change a man into a gorilla. A man to a gorilla.
Are you an animal or a person?
I'm animal gorilla.
The words we just heard were spoken by the gorilla Koko to the human being Penny Patterson. Let's look at those words from the point of view of the way a world looks to a culture critic. And let's take culture apart like these balls of yarn. First, I'd like to explain the principle that I use in looking at the production of modern culture. It seems to me the cultural critic is faced by a world that looks very much like tangled balls of yarn, and that one way to approach the situation is to pull on a thread and begin to untangle the ball of meanings and begin to trace through one thread and then another what gets to count as nature, for whom and when, and how much it costs to produce nature at a particular moment in history for a particular group of people. What gets to count as nature, for whom and when, and how much it costs to produce nature at a particular moment in history for a particular group of people, 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 for a particular group of people. And another way to imagine the same situation is to take a layer cake, Pepperidge Farm layer cake, formerly boycotted because of the Nestle bottle feeding scandal, to take a layer cake and cut into history as if it were a layer cake and begin to unpack the layers of meanings. Okay. Unpack the layers of meanings of all of the pleasures and all of the problems that these layers of meanings produce for the historian and the culture critic. So let's go back to Penny Patterson and Koko and the problem of the talking gorillas and the talking chimpanzees in the first world in this mythic time called the late 20th century. And let's do it by looking at some covers of the National Geographic magazine that presented Koko to an American public in the 1970s. The first cover of a National Geographic magazine we see is Koko the gorilla taking a picture of herself in the mirror with a Japanese camera. And what we see is the gorilla with the attribute of self-reflection, self-vision. The gorilla with a Japanese tourist camera sees herself in the mirror and takes her own picture. She's in charge of her own image. She represents universal man. The next picture we see in the National Geographic magazine is Koko the gorilla with the kitten in her arms. Koko herself with a pet. Koko again is universal man who names the animals. There's a wonderful story associated with Koko and the kitten. The kitten's name is All Ball, named by Koko as her own pet companion. Koko had asked Penny for a kitten for several months and had always been turned down by her human companion, Penny Patterson, on the grounds basically that she wouldn't take care of her pet, that she might be too rough with her, she wouldn't feed her, she wouldn't clean up after her, the kitten would probably be abused, the same grounds that other kids in the Silicon Valley are refused pets. So when the kitten, All Ball, wanders into Koko's trailer in the Los Altos Hills, and Koko adopts the kitten, we learn several things. We learn, first of all, that this is a kitten who was suckled by a dog, that this is a kitten who is already on the boundaries of species meanings. And this ambiguous boundary animal kitten wanders into Koko's world, is taken up by Koko and named, as Adam names the animals in the Garden of Eden. And once again, Koko is typed as universal man in the setting of the Silicon Valley in the Los Altos Hills. The next image of Koko that we see is Koko looking at herself in the mirror and looking at a book of the 3 little kittens who lost their mittens. And Koko is signing naughty, naughty. And we learn 2 things about Koko as she reads her childhood book with the animal characters, the 3 little kittens who lost their mittens. We learn first that Koko engages in moral discourse, that she knows the difference between good behavior and naughty behavior, and that the other animals represent themselves to Koko just as they do to human children. That Koko reads the book of nature as a question of natural and sacred history, that Koko engages in moral discourse, and again has the signs of universal man. And so we have 2 of the strands, self-reflection, naming the animals, and the 3rd sign, moral discourse. American Sign Language is a human language. Disabled people who speak American Sign Language, who communicate with this language, have pointed out the power relationships in which that language is situated at the boundary between nature and culture, so that the traffic across nature and culture for late 20th century first world people in the United States is mediated through a language of the disabled, and so that the markings of universal man in turn are mediated through an animal, a primate, Koko, who signifies not a female adolescent gorilla or a particular animal at a particular place in a particular history, but rather the animal represents universal man.
You could talk to the animals, could you justify your reasons?
Okay, first, can you tell me about what you see? Can you tell me a little about that? What do you see? Margie, trouble! Wait a minute. I've got to see if there's someone in here that looks like Margie. Just a minute. Well, there's a